Passover was great. I'll just say a blessing on my water. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihiyeh bidvaro.
Amen.
It's interesting, the blessing that we make on water, or really anything that didn't grow from the ground, is shehakol nihiyeh bidvaro, which means that everything in this world came into being. Shehakol means everything. Nihiyeh means came into being bidvaro, through His word, through God's speech. We believe that God had 10 utterances, He said 10 phrases, and the world came into being. So we say thank you for the water. We say everything in this world, thank you for everything. And I once heard a beautiful idea. Why is it that we go so broad with this bombastic praise? God, thank you. Just say thank you for the water. It's a good cup of coffee, a good cup of water. Why are we saying the entire world? Why are we going so broad? So I saw this idea explained. I think the microphone is working.
Yes.
Amazing. So a fellow goes into a British tea house and he orders a cup of Earl Grey tea. And it's a posh, it's a fancy, an upscale tea house. He enjoys his cup of tea and he asks for his bill. And it's the equivalent of about $10. And he says to the waitress, I don't understand, it's a cup of tea. The tea bag costs no more than 50 cents. Why are you charging me $10? And the waitress says, sir, you're correct. If you drank that cup of tea at home, it would cost no more than 50 cents. But did you notice the plush cushion upon which you sit? The beautiful tapestries adorning the walls, the light fixtures hanging so elegantly from the ceiling, the music, classical, playing in the background. You're paying for the ambiance. And the idea is that in this world, when we enjoy a cup of water on a sunny day, I wish the curtains were open right now, as the sun shines in and the clouds have parted, finally the sun is shining. We're not just saying thank you for the water, we're saying thank you for the beautiful world in which we drink the cup of water. You know, I love to hike. I'm a hiker, I'm an outdoorsman. When I got married, I told my wife, I want to go fishing. And she said, of course, we'll go to a Hilton. You can put fish in the jacuzzi and knock yourself out. And when I go hiking, I like to brew. Before I set out early in the morning, I brew a pot of coffee. I pour it into my thermos. I love thermoses. Thermos is one of the greatest inventions out there. And I pour my coffee into the thermos. I put it in my backpack and I take it up to the summit of the mountain. When I finally get up there, I pour that cup of coffee and I drink it, overlooking the incredible view. It's a different cup of coffee when you're seeing a beautiful world around you. That's why we say shehakol nihiyeh bidvaro. When we enjoy the food among friends in this beautiful world, it changes the reality of the food that we're eating. I could just share with you one more idea. You know, rabbis over Passover, they have ideas. And I had an idea. I was reading a Jewish book called the Sefer about happiness. And one of the greatest sources of happiness that people could have is some sense of fulfillment, some sense of meaning in their life. So if you're going to sit on the beach drinking the lemonade, that's amazing, that's awesome. It's a great vacation, but it's a vacation. If you did that every day of your life, you would feel empty inside. You would never be happy doing just that. And having a sense of fulfillment, purpose in our lives, gives us true happiness. You know, sometimes when you work really hard, you have incredible happiness, especially if you have blessing in your endeavors and everything that you do turns out well. You worked really hard, you'll feel good, you feel fulfilled. And in this Sefer, in this Jewish book about happiness, it says that in Judaism, everything we do has meaning and purpose. And I just drank a cup of water, a bottle, took a sip, and I thank God. And even the mundane things in our day, if we eat for the right purposes, we eat in order to have strength to go about doing the meaningful things that we want to do. And we spend time cooking that food. And if when we do laundry so that our children, our families, our spouses should have clean clothes to wear. It's an incredible thing. You know, I meet people all the time, and I met a guy and he says, Rabbi, you're a rabbi, you do a lot of mitzvahs. Me, not so much. And I said, really, is that so? Tell me. What do you spend most of your day doing? And he said, well, I spend most of my day, I'm a lawyer. I spend most of my day preparing for classes, presenting in court, a lot of paperwork as a lawyer. And I said, okay, why are you a lawyer? He said, well, I need to provide for my family. I said, wow, so you're working all day to be able to give your children an education. to be able to give them food and the clothing they need to wear. Isn't that kindness? What greater gift can you give someone than an education? Clothing on their back, they don't have to worry where their next meal is coming from. Is that not a mitzvah? Everything we do in our lives as Jews could be infused with meaning. A simple sip of water, you say the blessing before and you acknowledge the source of where that water came from. It came from God. He gave us this beautiful world. Everything we do as Jews, meaningful, purposeful, and thereby we are happy, even with the mundane. So that was my Passover thought for you. I had a lot of time to think. We drove from Michigan to New York, which I don't recommend anyone ever do with 4 children in the back seat. Thank God, modern technology, you can get one of these iPads or DVD systems, mount them onto the car, and the children are entertained. It's good to be back. So the topic for today's class is the convert in Judaism. You know, anyone who wants can become Jewish. There's a way, there's a method. When someone becomes Jewish, how will they be treated by the rest of the fold? These are topics that I would like to discuss with you. And my presentation of this class is a bit different than the norm. I gave you an outline where there are no sources, but the structure of everything I would like to cover today is there. And then we have another booklet of some sources, all the different texts in the Torah and the commentaries, as well as the works of the Halacha of Maimonides and the Shulchan Aruch will be presented in both its original Hebrew and an English translation. So, if I were to ask you, which commandment in the Torah is repeated most often? Now, this is an important idea that there are many commandments in the Torah. The Torah will say multiple times, do not do a certain thing. Or it will say, do something, and it will repeat it more than once. For example, forbidden foods. Not all forbidden foods, not all non-kosher foods are created equal. I believe one of the worst things, and this is great because no one here ever wants to do this, one of the worst things you can ever put in your mouth as not kosher is blood. The Torah, in this week's Torah portion, several times says, don't drink blood. That's why when we make meat kosher, one of the processes that goes into making kosher meat is we put kosher salt. We coat it liberally on all the sides with kosher salt, and we put it in a bowl with holes, and that draws out the blood. We're not allowed to eat blood. It's repeated many times in the Torah. Eating insects. It's worse to eat insects than it is to eat pork. I'm not advocating eating pork. You know, I once met a guy, and we meet for coffee, and he says, Rabbi, is it okay? I'm starving. Is it okay if we go to the restaurant? I know we normally meet in Starbucks. Can we meet at the restaurant? I said, sure, I'll have a cup of coffee anywhere. I get it in a to-go cup. So there's no problem of the cup being ceramic and not kosher. So I order my cup of coffee. They give it to me in a to-go cup, and he orders bacon and eggs. And he says, Rabbi, I hope I'm not making you uncomfortable. To be truthful, I was a little bit uncomfortable. But I said, okay, you'll eat what you'll eat. But just one thing. Don't think for a moment that because I'm sitting here across from you, watching you eat that bacon, that it's under rabbinical supervision. It is not. My point is there are prohibitions, there are commands that are repeated many times in the Torah. It'll say the same thing again and again. Why? Why would the Torah repeat something multiple times? We got it the first time. And the answer that's given is that when the Torah wants to accentuate something, when it wants to tell you this is really important, it creates a certain stringency. It will repeat it again and again. So I ask you, friends, which commandment in the Torah is repeated most often? And the answer to that question is, how as Jews do we treat converts? In Hebrew, the term for a convert is a ger. When somebody joins our ranks, converts to Judaism, do we welcome them with open arms? Or do we reject them and say, you're not really one of us? The commandment of how to properly and correctly treat the convert is repeated, we'll see the source shortly, 36, if not 46 times in the Torah, several of which are in this week's Torah portion. Let's turn to our first source, which is in Exodus. So, on your source sheet, the first source is, you shall not taunt or oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Going back to the very beginning of our nation, we went down to Egypt, living there among the Egyptians. We knew what it felt like to be a stranger, a newcomer to the scene, to not really belong or fit in. Make sure you treat that stranger correctly. I'll skip for a moment to another source. Turned a few pages to get there. But let's turn to page 4, source 8. We'll be flipping around here and there, so bear with me, please. Top source on page 4, source number 8. The Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Bava Metzia. It says as follows. It was taught in a Brisa. A Brisa is a teaching of the Tanaim, the early rabbis. Says Rabbi Eliezer the Great, why does the Torah admonish us in 36 places? And some say in as many as 46 places. My guess is there's a discrepancy if in the same verse it says it twice in 2 different ways. Do we count it as 1 or as 2? And therefore there's a dispute as to how to count that. But why is the Torah so careful for how we treat the convert? And one of the explanations that's given, if somebody grew up pagan, worshiping idols, that was what his family, that was his tradition. They were Buddhist. And they one day realized, I see truth in Judaism. I'm going to convert. I want to become Jewish. And we don't welcome that person. We reject them. They come to shul, and you say, don't sit next to me. Find somewhere else. I only sit next to people that are born Jewish. And he feels rejected and dejected. He feels like he's not accepted. He's mistreated and oppressed. Maybe he'll go back. He'll say, you know what? In the temple of Buddha, I was accepted. There's always that concern. And therefore, the Torah tells us again and again. And if you go back to page 1, you'll find the following idea. Very often they ask the question, why is it that in the Torah, one verse will follow the next? It's called juxtaposition. When they put one idea followed by another, why is it that certain things are next to each other? And what is taught right before this command to not taunt the stranger is the commandment not to worship idols. It says, you may not worship idols. The next verse is, do not taunt the stranger. What's the connection between those 2 ideas? There's 2 explanations. It says the Midrash, source 2. Why is this admonition juxtaposed to the prohibition against idolatry? Don't taunt the strangers comes right after don't worship idols. To teach you that anyone who oppresses a convert, it is as if that person himself has worshipped idols. When you say hurtful words to him, we treat that tantamount to idolatry. For if one says to a convert, hey, how much pork is in your belly? As Jews, we know that that's prohibited food. Or you say, you're coming here to worship, to read from our Torah? Well, how many idols have you kissed and worshipped in the past? Hurtful words were recalling his past. The convert may revert back to his pagan ways. And it turns out that we have been the cause. It was our hurtful word that were the catalyst for that to happen. Therefore, it is as if you have worshipped idols. It's an incredible idea in Judaism. When you cause someone else to sin, the reason why they're doing it, we hold you responsible for that. And that's an incredible thing when you speak about bullying. And it's terrible what goes on in school nowadays. I don't know if it's changed much. I believe it has. Or perhaps we're just more aware of it with the incredible reach of social media. But children who take their own lives because they feel so miserable, that would be tantamount to murder based on this logic. If you cause someone to do that, you're the cause, you're the reason, you will be held responsible. So that's the midrashic explanation. The reason why it's next to the command about idolatry is because if he goes back to those pagan ways, it's on your head. There's another explanation given by the Chizkuni, a great rabbi of the 1100s, in source 3. And he says the reason why the Torah places this commandment, to treat a convert with respect and dignity, next to the prohibition against idolatry, is to teach us that even though God hates and detests the worship of idols, those are the first 2 of the 10 commandments. I am the Lord thy God. Recognize me and only me. The next one is you may not have any other gods. Those are 2 big ones. If those are numbers 1 and 2. By the way, fascinating idea, if I may digress for a moment. There's a phrase, there's a verse actually in the Torah. The verse goes, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moshe commanded us the Torah. Mo rasha kihilat Yaakov. It is the heritage, legacy of the Jewish people. And this is actually, it says in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, when you are teaching your child how to speak and you want to give them their first Hebrew phrase, this should be their first phrase. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moshe was the one who taught us the Torah. The numeric value of the word Torah in the Hebrew alphabet, every single letter corresponds to a number. So for example, the letter Aleph corresponds to 1. Bet is 2. Gimel is 3, etc. The word Torah, the numeric value of the word Torah, the Tuf is the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet that has a numeric value of 400. The Vav is 6, the Resh is 200, and the Hey at the end is 5. So if we're adding 2 and the 400, we get 600. And then we add the 5 and the 6, we get 11. 611. Moshe taught us 611 commandments of the Torah. But you'll ask, aren't there 613? What about the other 2? And the answer to that question, friends, is that Moshe didn't need to teach us those first 2. Because we at Sinai heard the first 2, I am the Lord thy God, and have no other gods before me. We heard those 2 directly from God himself. So Moshe taught us 611. The other 2, to complete the 613, we heard directly from God. Those were the first 2. Have no other gods before me. Don't worship idols. So it's safe to say that God does not like idol worship. This person who now converts to Judaism used to have a basement full of different kinds of idols. Wood ones, gold and silver, representing different spirits and forces. And now he wants to be Jewish. Will his past at all impact the way God relates to him? And that's the juxtaposition. Even though he has a very, very extensive past of worshiping idols, that's the past. Now is the present. He's a convert, he's Jewish. God will not care about his past at all. Says the Chizkuni, to teach us that even though God detests the worship of idols, he still loves the convert who separated himself from idol worship. Those are 2 explanations, again, why the Torah places this commandment of how to treat a convert. Either to teach us that if he goes back to his pagan ways because of you, it's as if you are responsible, it's as if you have worshipped idols. The second explanation is that despite his past, that bears no impact on the present, God loves him. No, we're told to treat converts well because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. And I'll share with you another Passover thought that I had because it's relevant to this topic. So Passover, we celebrate the Exodus from Egypt. We were in bondage, enslaved. We were there for 210 years. If we didn't fill the quota of bricks, they would do terrible things to our children. They would throw our babies into the Nile River. We were forced to build buildings that were not suitable to ever stand. And therefore it was futile labor where you would build it and it would collapse and you were commanded to rebuild it the next day. And God took us out, so we celebrate. We eat matzah, we drink wine. It's a beautiful holiday. But I think we need to appreciate the question of, well, why did we need to be there in the first place? God, it's true you took us out of Egypt, but didn't you bring us down there initially? Right? It's like if a guy locks you in a closet, right? He locks you in, comes back a few hours later, and he's like, why are you mad at me? I let you out, right? Yeah, but you locked me in there. If he can give you a good reason why he put you in there, your mom was going to be divvying out the chores that day, and you knew that your brother will be safe in the closet. You won't get any of the tasks. Then he'll thank you for letting him out because there was a good reason why you put him in there in the first place. But I don't want you to get the wrong impression. I always helped a lot at home. All right, I did all the tasks, the laundry, the chores. My mother raised me well. By the way, we continue that with our children, where when it comes, Friday, we're getting ready for the Shabbat. Every child has his own job. My oldest daughter sets the table. My oldest son is in charge of sweeping the kitchen and washing the strawberries. That's his job. And my youngest son, we tell him, please, just don't make any trouble, and you consider it as if you help. That's his contribution. So we have to ask ourselves, why did we need to be in Egypt in the first place? And I believe that this verse is very telling. It says, do not oppress the downtrodden, the easy victims. Don't go after them, because you know what it feels like. Very often somebody who went through an ordeal, the people that are funding, that care a great deal about MS research or cancer research, are people who had some kind of exposure to that in their own lives. Something which we've experienced, we relate to. And because we knew what it felt like to be enslaved, to be tormented, to be subjugated, we can easily identify with the victim. You learned what it means to have compassion. As Jews, we are known to have specific character traits. We're known to be kind, compassionate, and somewhat bashful. And it was instilled within us, in that Egyptian exile, the ability to be compassionate because we were victims of terrible tyranny. I had a fascinating experience once. There's a museum in New York, and I've referenced it in the past. It's called the Living Torah Museum. Rated by some of the most critical museum review magazines, is one of the top museums in New York City. Stiff competition over there. And one of the incredible things about this museum is that they have Judaica from a really long time ago. They have the oldest menorah, the Hanukkah menorah, the oldest one in existence they have. And it's not simply on display. They allow you to hold it in your hand. It's worth millions of dollars, and you hold it in your hand. And he has another section to the museum. His name is Rabbi Deutsch. He was a child who had a learning disability. He was dyslexic. Brilliant, but he had a disability. He never succeeded in school. They didn't think he was bright, and he is. Now one of his hobbies is he's working on a school for dyslexic children. We speak about the idea of if you've gone through something, then it becomes your baby. You own it. You have a sensitivity towards it. So in another section of this museum, aside from the Judaica and the artifacts of Jewish significance, he has another section where he has every single animal that is referenced in the Torah. They don't kill any animals. If that's an issue to anyone, they never kill any animals. Animals that have died naturally, they preserve and they stuff. And he takes children, not only of Jewish background, he'll take public schools in New York City into these museums. And they show them a video in the animal park, and there's a chase between a lion and a deer. And he said, Rabbi Deutsch, he noticed something incredible. Young elementary school children, grades 1st through 8th. As they watch this chase, the lion is hunting down the deer, pursuing it. The public school children, those that are not Jewish, will always be rooting for the lion. Get him! Get him! Go, 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 go! The Jewish children are always rooting for the deer. Escape! Go, go, hide! Get away! As Jews, we've learned to place our sensitivities in the place of the victim. We gained that in Egypt. And perhaps there's more. I believe there's definitely more. But that's one thing we gained in Egypt. Says the Torah to us, treat the convert, treat the stranger well. Those that are oppressed, the easy victims. Because you know what it felt like. You were in Egypt. You could identify. I'll read with you a few more of the places where the Torah instructs us to treat the convert well. Just to give you an appreciation for how expansive this is. So first of all, I want to turn to page 2. Rashi, the classic commentator of the Torah, takes the verse apart and he shows us every nuance of the wording. Says Rashi in source 4, you shall not taunt a stranger. Because then it says don't oppress him. What are those two things? What does it mean to taunt him and to oppress him? They sound very similar to us. Says Rashi, taunting refers to verbal abuse, words, hurtful words. And we all know, sometimes you could hurt a person worse with words than you can with physical abuse. People have a difficult time appreciating that. Whenever there's a relationship where there's physical abuse, we easily understand, oh, that's terrible, you know? Verbal abuse could hurt much worse, more profoundly. Don't say hurtful things to him. Don't oppress him means by stealing his money, by dealing dishonestly with him. He doesn't even speak our language, you know. It's for him I give you a special deal. You go to Israel, you know, you go in the store, you look American, they say for you special deal, and they charge you a lot more than it should cost, you know. Don't do that to the stranger just because he doesn't understand your language. He's not part of your culture. He's newly initiated to the Jewish people. Treat him fairly and honestly. The Torah portion of this week, I believe, is the portion that has more mitzvahs than any Torah portion out there. And most of them seem to be how to treat other people honestly. Make sure you pay your workers on time. Don't steal, don't cheat. Make sure your measures and your weights are accurate. So if you're a store owner and people are buying by the pound, make sure your pound is exactly a pound. The Torah cares so much about honesty, decency, how we treat our fellow man. Continues the Rashi, for you were strangers. If you taunt him, says Rashi, he could taunt you right back and say to you, well, you also came from strangers. A blemish that you possess in yourself, don't fault others with. In Hebrew, it's a famous phrase, mum shebacha, when you have a blemish, a deficiency, al tomer lechavercha, don't mention it, don't call your friend out on it. In English, we say, if you live in glass houses, don't throw stones. And then Rashi defines for us this word ger. In Hebrew, the way we refer to a convert is a ger. Says Rashi, ger refers to someone who wasn't born in this particular country, but came from another country and settled here. That's the word ger. We take it to mean colloquially as someone who has converted to Judaism. That's a ger. So just to show you a few places in the Torah where it commands us to treat them well, in Deuteronomy it says, you shall love the proselyte. It's a fancier way of saying convert. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Again in Exodus, do not oppress a stranger. You know the feelings of a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Again and again, the Torah commands us how to treat him. There's a great book out there which is called the Sefer HaChinuch. And what he does is, he lists by number every single one of the 613 commandments. And he does it based on the order of the Torah portion. So he'll give you, okay, in the Torah portion of this week, how many commandments are there? What are they? And he'll give you some flavor. He calls them the roots of the mitzvah, and to make it palatable. Why do we have this commandment? And this is where he describes mitzvah number 63, how to treat a convert. Says the Chinuch in Source 7, page 3, we must refrain from taunting the ger, even with just words. A ger is someone from one of the other nations who converted and entered into our religion. It is forbidden to shame him or her with words. As the Torah writes, in a convert you shall not oppress. Even though, asks he a question, isn't this true for any other person? Right? There's a commandment in the Torah that speaks about verbal abuse. We know there's Lashon Hara, you can't speak ill of others behind their back. There's something called Rechiluk, where I can't say to somebody, you would not believe what Johnny just said about you. I couldn't believe he said that about you. And you go and you tell him exactly what Johnny said about him. That will not sow the seeds of love or friendship between those two people, I promise you. And then we have the concept of saying hurtful words directly to somebody's face. My mother-in-law tells me that she went back to Israel to visit her husband's family. And the first thing one of the relatives says to her is in Hebrew, Hishmat, which means, my, you have put on some weight. Right, you got that one right away, right? Israelis are like that. They're very bold, they're very matter of fact, Most women don't like to be told that, from what I hear. So,
this is true.
Excellent. Thank you for corroborating that. Hurtful words. So it's not behind their back, but you say something to somebody which will make them feel bad about themselves. Forbidden. So it's not limited to a convert. Why then would the Torah go out of its way to again and again reiterate and restate? A convert, do not taunt, do not oppress. And that's his question, even though we are already enjoined against this for any Jew. And this one, once he entered our religion, becomes that. Still the Torah adds more prohibitions for taunting a convert. Why? For it is easier to mock him. For other Jewish people, they have a support group. The bully never picks on the popular person because he has a team standing by his side supporting him. It's always the Lone Ranger that he'll go after. And there's also another reason which we've seen about insulting a ger, for we are afraid that out of dejection he may return to his pagan ways. So those are the two reasons that we've seen why the Torah is more careful. A, he's an easy victim. The Torah always stands up for the easy victims, the orphans, the widows. We're reminded again and again in the Torah, make sure you don't ever say something hurtful to a woman who's a widow. She has no husband. Be very careful what you say to her. An orphan, a child without parents. Extremely careful. And here as well, the convert, he has no support group. Now when it comes to the root of the mitzvah, that means giving some flavor, some explanation. Why? So aside from what we've already stated, it's intended to restrain our spirit. Meaning the Torah cares a lot about our own personal character development. We are meant to train ourselves to be sensitive and kind people. And therefore we're told, even though he's easy to go after, you will adorn yourself with incredible character if you make sure to be very careful what you say to him. I would like to digress for a moment, and this is actually on our outline. We've covered so far parts 1 and 2 of our outline. If you go through that, you will see, I believe we've covered everything on there. What I want to do now is discuss some of the famous converts to Judaism. People who are renowned, well-known in our tradition. The first one is a man named Onkelos. Now, I know you guys were going to say, Elizabeth Taylor, and you were going to say Leonardo DiCaprio is considering converting so he can marry the Israeli model, right? What's her name? Bar Rafaela? Is that the? I think so. This is what I've heard. But I'm going to stick to people that played more prominent roles in our history, in forming us as a nation, not what they've given to Hollywood. So Onkelos was a man who is accredited with writing the most authentic version of the Aramaic. Jews used to speak Aramaic when they lived in Babylon. That was the most prominent language. That's why the Kaddish that we say, the prayer for the deceased, is written in Aramaic. It's not Hebrew, it's Aramaic. That was the language of the Jews going back to that era. And he wrote the most authentic translation of the Torah in Aramaic, which is studied till this day. It says in the Code of Jewish Law that you were meant to go through the Parsha, the Torah portion, every single week. You have to read it in Hebrew twice and once in Aramaic. And I do this every week. I've been doing it since I'm 18 years old. When I was 18 years old, I had a teacher who came over to me every week and said, Chaim, are you studying the Torah portion twice and then doing the Aramaic translation once and then reading the commentary of Rashi in its entirety? I said, no. He said, well, why not? It's so important. And I had a different excuse every week. And he came back, though. He was persistent, this man. And eventually it became easier just to do it than to come up with new creative excuses. Something new every time wasn't easy. But to his credit, and I owe this to him, and I really should call him and tell him this, I haven't missed a week. I'm 36 now, I was 18 then. For the past 18 years, I've gone through the Torah portion with this Aramaic translation, as well as Rashi. And when you do that, it really gives you there's no section, there's no part of the Torah that you're not familiar with. You may not know all of the intricate details, but at least you've seen the top layer of everything. The Talmud tells us that Onkelos was the nephew of a very famous villain. Now, who's this villain? Have you heard of Titus? Titus was the man who was responsible for destroying the Second Temple. The story goes, there was a man named Vespasian. Vespasian was the Roman emperor. In roughly the year 70 in the Common Era, 70 AD, Vespasian was the emperor. And he was sent, at the time he was not yet the emperor, when he first laid siege to Jerusalem. Vespasian was the general, and there was a siege around Jerusalem. The people inside were starving, they were thirsty. A great Jewish rabbi came out, snuck out a fascinating story how he got out. The Jews didn't want to let their rabbi out because they wanted to fight, they didn't want to make peace. If you could imagine, among the Jews, they didn't agree on exactly how to handle the situation. There were a few opinions. And the great rabbi finally comes out and he meets Vespasian, who was the general. And he says, peace unto you, emperor. Vespasian says, you deserve to die because I'm not the emperor. And if you just call me emperor, you are belittling, you're dishonoring the emperor who's back in Rome. And you're making fun of me. And this great rabbi named Rabbi Yochanan says, well, in our tradition we believe that Jerusalem will only fall to an emperor. And if you're here being successful in your siege as you are, you must be the emperor. And just then a courier comes from Rome informing Vespasian that the previous emperor had passed and the noblemen in Rome had voted Vespasian as the next emperor. He had to go back to Rome. He sent Titus in his place. Titus was the man who destroyed our temple. Evil person. And his nephew was Onkelos. And Onkelos, after his uncle's passing, was able to use some form of sorcery and asked his uncle Titus, what do you think about the Jews? And he said, in this world up here, they're doing great. In this world of truth, they're doing great. But if you want to really become an important person in the world down below, in this world, if you start with them, if you antagonize them, you always see that the ones that oppress the Jews always start as a world power. They don't have a very good ending usually. But when you think about the Germans, when the Germans oppressed us, They were the strongest nation in the world at the beginning of World War II. And it's like that throughout history. Spain, during the Spanish Inquisition, they were the powerhouse of the world. It's usually like that. So if you antagonize them, if you start with them, you will achieve fame and prestige. But Onkelos says, what's your punishment? And Titus says, well, it's not going so well for me here in this world. I'm being punished for what I did. And that inspired Onkelos to convert to Judaism. And he gave us this translation that we still use to this day. The famous Rabbi Akiva. If you've noticed, my beard is a little scruffier than usual. And the reason for that is that we are now in the time period known as the counting of the Omer. During this time period, the great sage Rabbi Akiva, who he had very humble beginnings. When he was 40 years old, he couldn't differentiate between the letter Aleph and Bet. But he applied himself, he dedicated himself to Torah study. And eventually he had 24,000 students, the greatest teacher in all of Israel. But these students didn't treat each other with proper respect and honor. And because of that, God saw that they couldn't be the ones to carry the torch of the Torah to the next generation. And over the course of 33 days, 24,000 of his students passed away. And as a sign of mourning, one of the signs of mourning that Jews do is they let their hair grow. So I haven't shaven since Passover. And we're now at the 22nd day of the Omer. On the 33rd day, known as Lag BaOmer, that's when finally I can stop shampooing my beard. I am greatly looking forward to that. Rabbi Akiva, after he lost his 24,000 students, didn't give up. He could have, but he didn't. And he got 5 more students that he taught, and they were the ones who continued the legacy of the Torah in the Jewish people. But Rabbi Akiva, he himself was from a family of converts. And when you think about the contribution that he made to the Jewish people, there were 2 people by the name of Shmaya and Avtalia. And they are mentioned in the very first chapter of the Ethics of Our Fathers, where the Mishnah teaches us the heritage, the tradition from Moses going to Joshua, going all the way down. Shemaiah and Avtalion were the 2 leaders of their generation, that they are the ones who carried the tradition. After them comes the famous Hillel and Shammai, of whom we've heard a lot. But Shemaiah and Avtalion were themselves converts. And there's a famous story, moving ahead in history, known as Avraham, the son of Avraham, the famous Ger, the famous convert. He was a Polish nobleman of the family Potowski. He lived in the 1600s, and he saw the truth in Judaism, and he wanted to convert. The Catholic Church did not like one of their noblemen converting to Judaism, and he was imprisoned and eventually burned at the stake. But that was another very famous convert in the Jewish people. And when you look at the positions of leadership, of Torah erudition that these converts managed to achieve, you see it's indicative of how welcome they are into our fold. We accept them with warm and open arms, and they're able to ascend the ladder among the Jewish people. Moving on, I just want to explain, when we speak about the term ger, a convert, there are 2 kinds of converts in Judaism. One of them is known as a ger toshav, a resident convert. And that's somebody who doesn't really become Jewish. They don't convert to Judaism. They don't become Jewish. They want to live in Israel with the Jewish people. And we in Judaism have something called the Noahide Code. There are 7 laws that non-Jews, if they want to live among us, should they keep those laws, we say, okay, you definitely are welcome to live among us in Israel. What are those 7? So the first one is do not murder. You're not allowed to murder. Do not steal. Sexual immorality. They have to set up a fair system of courts. They're not allowed to eat a limb that was taken from a live animal. They're not allowed to curse God's name. It's a Noahide code. So any non-Jew who says, okay, I'm not going to worship idols, I am not going to be a pagan, I'm not going to murder, steal, I'll be a good, upstanding person, they are given a share. They could not a share really, but they don't. When the land was distributed, it was distributed among the 12 tribes of Israel. But should they wish to live in the land of Israel, no problem, not a problem. We will allow you to live there among us. Fascinatingly, I'll ask you the question, and this was interesting. Is there a mitzvah in the Torah to give charity, to give tzedakah to non-Jews? Is the mitzvah of tzedakah only to Jewish people, or does it apply to non-Jews as well? And I'll share with you something fascinating. Let's take a look at a source. I first want to see the way Maimonides defines this concept of a ger toshav, a resident convert who's not Jewish, but he abides by a certain mode of behavior, and we are very happy and allowing to say, come live among us. That's in source 9. What is a ger toshav, a resident ger? He says this is a non-Jew who has accepted upon himself not to worship the stars and the constellations, which was so prevalent back then, together with the other commandments of the Noahide code, which we enumerated before, but has not performed circumcision or dipped in a mikveh, which we're going to discuss shortly when we discuss how to become Jewish. If you want to become a convert, what do you have to do? We'll get to that momentarily. So it says, Maimonides, we accept him, and he's considered to be among the righteous of the Gentiles. And he's called a toshav, for it is permissible for us to give him dwelling among us in the land of Israel. Pagans, the Torah says, don't let them live among you, because if they're worshiping their idols, that will influence you. We are all, this is a very important thought, we are very much influenced by the society in which we live. If we live in a very moral, upstanding, ethical society, it will rub off on us. If we're living in an unethical, immoral society, that will also impact us. Therefore, says the Torah, pagans know, but the resident converts, if they accept not to worship idols, not to murder, cheat, and steal, they can live in Israel. I want to share with you a verse in the book of Leviticus, and herein contains the answer to the question is there a mitzvah to give charity to non-Jews as well? It says the verse in Leviticus 25:35. If your brother becomes impoverished, and his means falter in your proximity, you're nearby, you shall strengthen him, proselyte or resident, so that he can live with you. Let's see Rashi's commentary on this verse. Page 5. Source 11. So first Rashi explains, what does it mean to strengthen somebody? When somebody begins a downward spiral in their economic status, it says Rashi, don't allow him to go down and fall, because then it will be difficult to lift him. Rather, fortify him from the moment that his hand begins to falter. To what is this comparable? To a load that is on the back of a donkey. While it still rests on top of the donkey, one person can grab hold of it to right it. The load is shifting to the right, just give it a little push to the left, and you right the load. But if it falls to the ground, even 5 people can't lift it up. And this is true. Sometimes when a person's business is starting to slip, you give him a little loan right then, whammo, he's good. Once the business crashes and he's bankrupt, it will take far more efforts to set him straight. Don't let him get down in the dumps. That's this mitzvah of charity. And who is this proselyte or resident that the Torah is telling us to help and support? Says Rashi, even if he's a proselyte or a resident, what is a resident? This is anyone who has accepted not to worship idols, yet still he's never committed to eat only kosher. That means he hasn't accepted all the mitzvahs of the Torah. He's not a convert. He's not Jewish. But he lives a moral and ethical life. He's living among us in Israel. It's a mitzvah, says Rashi, to support him and give him charity. Hence the mitzvah of charity applies both to non-Jew and Gentile, both to Jew and Gentile alike. Fascinating. Let's keep going. Let's talk about the conversion process. Somebody comes to me, they say, Rabbi, I would like to become Jewish. First question I'll say, well, who's the young man and the young woman? But in seriousness, our approach, and we're going to see the source of that, when somebody comes to convert, I would say, really? You want to do what? Why would you want to become Jewish? You know, you look at our history. Jews have been oppressed. Hasn't been easy. You know that there were hospitals here in Michigan that had to be started by Jewish doctors because they were not allowed to practice in other hospitals. Not so long ago, someone Jewish couldn't buy a home in Birmingham. Am I correct? This is right. This is common knowledge here. This is not going back that far. Why do you want to become Jewish? And if you'll say, well, it doesn't bother me, I'll say to the person, you know, to be an upstanding, good non-Jew in the eyes of God is not that difficult. Know a high code, be a decent person. Do you know how many mitzvahs Jewish people have? 613. That's a lot. You know what it's like to eat matzah for 8 days straight? That's a number on your stomach. Woo! You want that? I get the gefilte fish part is fun, all right. But kosher restaurants, limited to kosher restaurants? That nails down your selection here in Detroit to about 3 or 4. We discourage. But should we see, and we're going to see the source of that, should we see they're sincere, what would it take for them to become Jewish? The first thing, if the person is a man, bris milah, circumcision. Now, this is the first thing we'll ask them to do. Before the next step, which is immersion, ritual immersion in a mikvah, the first thing they do is circumcision. Why that one first? Very simple, folks. Are you serious about this, all right? This is the litmus test. This, if you're wishy-washy, and they'll say, you want me to do what? That will deter them. But if they are stalwart in their convictions, if they're really serious about going through with this, then they will be undeterred at the concept of circumcision. And by the way, circumcision, when you're dealing with a little baby, it's no big deal. They do it in a shul, not a problem. The baby usually a few days later is doing okay. I remember with my first son, he was crying a lot. My mother-in-law was nervous. She said, you have to call the mall. The fellow who gave the bris. I called him. He says, in Hebrew to me, I did this in Israel, Gamani bachiti. I also cry when my father gave me a bris. That's normal, As a baby, it hurts a little. As an adult, it's an operation. It's a full-fledged operation. That is the first step for a man, obviously not for a woman. Now, what do you do if somebody already had a circumcision, it was very common and popular, in vogue in America? Everyone would have circumcisions, Jewish or not. So if someone had a circumcision already, when they were not Jewish, then what do? Nothing left to circumcise. So the answer there is they still draw a drop of blood, that this should be done in the process of becoming Jewish by a Jewish person. That's not a big deal, that's just a little prick, in a sensitive spot nonetheless, but it's just a little prick. And they do that for the mitzvah of bris, of circumcision. That's the first step. The next step is immersion in a mikvah. A mikvah is a pool of water where the water was never collected in a vessel. They use rainwater, they funnel it in, and it's considered a body of water that has the ability to purify. A person dips in that mikvah. That applies to both men and women. The next stage, that there's a lot of controversy about conversion. Does this group recognize the conversion of that group? This is a contested topic. And the reason why conversion is a contested topic is primarily for this next criteria. And this is the way it's written in the Code of Jewish Law. This is the way conversion has been done for thousands of years. And it's the following. If you want to become Jewish, you have to accept the mitzvahs. You have to say, I am willing to abide by and practice and observe all of the mitzvahs. Now, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to know all of them. That means that a person, before they become Jewish, they get this big book called the Sefer HaChinuch, which lists all 613, and they got to spend, it's like a lawyer studying for the bar exam. No, you don't necessarily have to know all of them. But you have to say, as I continue to learn and grow, I will observe, I will perform every mitzvah as I learn it. Now, this is an interesting thing. When you're born Jewish, let's say you're not religious in any way. You don't fast on Yom Kippur. You have a pastrami sandwich with bread Passover night instead of matzah and gefilte fish. You are 100% Jewish as someone else who's eating the shmur hand matzah that does a number on your stomach. And as someone else who spends his day decked in white the entire day in the synagogue on Yom Kippur. Levels of observance don't determine how Jewish you are once you are born Jewish. There are no gray areas. There's no very Jewish, little Jewish, barely Jewish. It's black or white. You either are 100% Jewish or not Jewish. But when you want to join the fold, there's a greater buy-in. You want to become Jewish. We have a Torah. That's an important part of being Jewish. Do you accept it? And this is the arena in which conversions of different groups, this is what creates a lot of controversy, because the Orthodox, they abide by what's written in the Code of Jewish Law, and conversion requires acceptance of all the mitzvahs. Other groups do not. So that's just I want to give you that understanding. It's not that Orthodox Jews don't consider other Jews Jews. They do, 100%. But if you want to become Jewish, the Orthodox will follow the laws as they are written in the Shulchan Aruch, which requires an acceptance of all the mitzvahs. I remember I was one time explaining to somebody, he was seeing a girl who wasn't Jewish. And he said to me, what would it take for her to become Jewish? I said, well, she has to accept the mitzvahs. He's like, okay, no problem. She could do that. Like, give me some examples. I said, okay, she would have to eat only kosher food. He's like, not a problem. She could do that. For how long does she have to eat kosher food for? And I said, forever. And he said, forever? No way, you know? It's an incredible commitment. And that's part of the reason why we would discourage somebody who wants to convert. It's not easy. It's not easy to abide by all those commandments. There's another ingredient which is not really relevant nowadays, but that was in the times of the temple. When somebody converted, they would bring a special offering to the temple, part of their process of becoming Jewish. So, in summation of this point, what does it take to become Jewish for a man? First, circumcision, immersion in a mikvah, the ritual bath, and an acceptance of the mitzvahs. For a woman, it's just an immersion with the acceptance of the mitzvahs. In temple times, they would bring an offering. Excuse me. We're going to finish up quickly. I wanted to just share with you, because we are counting the Omer, and that's a count from Passover to Shavuot. On Shavuot, we read the story of Ruth, who was the great-great-grandmother of King David. She was a convert. And many of the laws and our approach to conversion is learned from this moment, where her mother-in-law, a woman named Naomi, had traveled to the land of Moab when there was a famine in Israel. And there her sons married Moabite girls. Both of her sons passed away there, and she's returning to Israel with her two daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. And she turns to them and she says, girls, your princess is in the land of Moab. Don't come back to Israel with me, go back home. And Orpah kisses her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth says the following, I would like to read this with you inside the text. Let us turn to page number 5, source 12. They were at this crossroads, at this point of separation. It says, they raised up their voice and they wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, look, says Naomi to Ruth, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and to her God. Go follow your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, no, do not urge me to leave, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge and spend the night, I will lodge and spend the night. Your people I will treat as my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. It's an allusion to Jewish burial. Thus may Hashem do to me and more, if anything but death separates me from you. That was her pledge of allegiance to the Jewish people. And at first we see that her mother-in-law Naomi tries to dissuade her, discourage her from converting. But once she persists, she's fully accepted. Not only accepted, but she becomes the great-grandmother of King David, who eventually is part of that chain of the lineage going all the way down to Messiah. I'll close with the following. You'll ask, well, are there any limitations in Jewish life to a convert? If you're not born Jewish, does that in any way limit you in what you can do? And the answer to that question is there's only one limitation. And we find that so much of Jewish law is the precedent for American secular law. In the United States of America, if somebody who is a foreigner, someone who was born in China to Chinese parents, immigrates to the United States, gains citizenship, they want to become president of the United States. Can they run for president? The answer is no. You have to be American born to do so. I believe that the source of that law is actually based in Jewish law. The only limitation that a convert has, when the Torah speaks of a king, it says you shall appoint for yourself a king from someone who is Jewish born. That's his only limitation. Other than that, he's welcomed with open arms. He's loved like one of us. And the Torah commands us again and again to make sure that we treat him well. Thank you.
Thank you.